Well, welcome everyone and to another conversation. And today I have with me Lina AbiRafeh from New York, who is the Executive Director of the Arab Institute for Women. Welcome, Lina. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm delighted.
So perhaps we can start, because we've got a big subject. We're talking about feminism and activism and what we can all do as a community. Perhaps we can start with a little bit of your background, because it's just so diverse.
Well, I came into this at a very young age. Actually, it's kind of an unusual story. I was 14 in high school, and I was in a high school class called Comparative Women's History. And it wasn't women's history we talked about, it was the history of violence against women. And I was absolutely appalled. And that was it for me. And since then, I've really done nothing but, that was all that I studied. It was all that I talked about. I volunteered for organizations that were trying to end violence against women. When I was old enough and when I had the right degrees and some experience, I went into the field and I spent about 2 decades doing humanitarian work, working on sexual violence in conflict and also in natural disasters. So I covered places like Afghanistan, Haiti, Mali, Congo, Central African Republic, Chad, Papua New Guinea, your neighbor to the north. All sorts of places where sexual violence and other forms of violence against women are a serious problem. I mean, it's worth saying that it's a serious problem everywhere, but in the context of war and natural disaster, all of those things are magnified. And then about 6 years ago, I decided that I should step back from the humanitarian front lines. And I moved into academia, where I now sit as the executive director of the Arab Institute for Women, which is a nearly 50-year-old institute, the first of its kind in the region, one of the first in the world. And it covers the 22 Arab states, working at the intersection of academia and activism.
Wow.
So in a nutshell.
And the programs that it spearheads, are there sort of plinths that you focus on?
We focus on 5 pillars, really. We focus on what you'd imagine of an academic institute: education and research. So creating programs on gender studies and on feminism for students and for mid-career professionals. Research that is academic and practitioner based through a journal, through a paper series, through edited books, that type of stuff. Community-based development projects, because everything that we do all the time has to have an impact on women's lives and lived realities. So our focus is not just research for research's sake, but actually looking at social change and policy change and how we want to drive forward our agenda in the region. Outreach, workshops, learning events, knowledge, and then youth engagement, because we really look at, particularly in the region, focusing on young people and seeing them not as the leaders of tomorrow, but as leaders today in their own right. We have a very significant young population in the Arab region, and they are already taking charge, and we just need to give them the tools and the resources to be able to finish the business that we might not be able to finish.
So I guess there's 2 questions that come to mind. First of all, we had Germaine Greer going back to the 70s and the Trailblazers, and then we had a gap. It got really quiet, and now we've had this re-emergence where feminism, violence against women, all of these issues are amplified. Why do you think that happened?
I have to say that it's always been there, and we just haven't really been paying attention. I mean, feminisms exist everywhere in the world, and there have been movements and fights for women's rights from the community to the national to the regional to the global levels. They are ongoing. As somebody who works in this field, I never really felt like, now I'm in my 25th year of it, I never really felt like there was much of a lull. In fact, what we're doing is seeing more commitment, more guidance, more media attention, more focus, more setbacks, which also has the unfortunate effect of driving forward movements, because suddenly we realize that the rights we thought we had, the gains we thought were secure, no longer are. So I think there's a lot of that kind of push and pull, a lot of the backlash. So I think right now we're really paying attention. It is a time where we hear about issues every single day in the media. We are talking about it as part of our conversation. We're really zoomed in on it, and I think that is fantastic. Now, the question is, how do we take all that conversation and energy and turn it into some concrete action. You know, there's a lot of talk and a lot of finger pointing and a lot of elevated expectations. But what we need to recognize is that there are women who at the grassroots level have been fighting for their rights all along. And what are we really doing in our belated awakening, perhaps as the international community or the media or whatever, to actually help those women drive forward their own movements and to bring about the change that they want to seek. And so there is a constant need to do work. I fear that I will never be out of a job. There's no retirement anywhere in my future.
But some of it's common sense. Why are we still fighting for rights? I mean, we're half the population.
Absolutely right. And it baffles me. And that's a question I ask myself all the time. And that was the question my 14-year-old self asked. I said, this is just unacceptable. But the reality is that our rights are so hard won and so easily stripped back. Even you saw so many instances of that during our previous administration in the US. And even today in certain states, women losing rights to their own bodies, to bodily integrity. We're talking about the US, so you can imagine in other places as well. I mean, this is a constant negotiation, and it's like we cannot take any of that for granted. I think it's frustrating, exhausting. It is the greatest abuse and human rights violation of our time or of any time, that we are 3.7 billion and still we're still talking about equality, which is something that is our given birthright.
Yeah, you led into what I was going to ask about women's health rights. Why do you think it's been so politicized? Because, you know, men's health rights is not politicized.
Exactly. And I love these questions because you're asking such wonderful common sense questions that I ask, and I think everybody should be asking. Why is it that we have to fight for rights to our own bodies and to make decisions about our own bodies? And absolutely, if it was men's bodies, we wouldn't be having these conversations. It would be a given. So what is it then really about women's bodies and women's rights to control them that is so intimidating that everybody wants their hands on us, literally? There's a global movement that was started when Trump took office called She Decides, which is a global movement for bodily integrity and autonomy. And I'm part of the group that works on that. And it's amazing to see the reception, because when I say she decides, which I think is a wonderful line and a no-brainer in so many ways, of course she decides. People say, well, no, but I'm not sure. And in some cases, maybe, and there's all sorts of caveats. But if I said he decides, people would say, yeah, all right then. So there is always this, there's always this sense that everything that we do, decisions we make about ourselves and our own bodies and our own abilities and our choices, has to come with all sorts of baggage. It has to be built around this consensus that in the end is largely men. But the same doesn't apply. So we're living this nightmare of a double standard, seemingly with no way out of it. But there are forces that are pushing. There are women all over the world who are fighting. There are men also who are opening doors and making gains and serving as allies and champions, as they should. But it is going to take a very long time for this to be treated as common sense. Because what I've learned, in fact, in now 30 some years of doing this, is that common sense isn't all that common.
I love that. I mean, it's like, sometimes you just need to put some words on the table and people go, where did that come from? Isn't that obvious? But you've got to articulate it. It's just extraordinary. And sometimes it's dumbing it down so that a 6-year-old can understand it. And that's part of the problem, I think, around some of the areas in the women's movement or the feminist movement, is we've developed all this language and all this jargon, and that's not helpful, I don't think.
I tend to agree with you. And my niece is 6, actually. And so she's my test case. And I tell her, I said, do you know what I do? And I ask her to explain back to me what she thinks that I do. And it's great because I say, sometimes in some places, in some parts of the world, people think girls are different from boys and that girls shouldn't do things that boys should do. And I explained it very simply. And she says, that's stupid. And I said, right, it is stupid. And I really want her to have the kind of world where all of those ideas continue to be stupid. And more than that, that all of my efforts and my campaigning is outdated and old-fashioned. I want her to say, oh, Lina, please, like we've got all of those things. We don't need to worry about that stuff anymore. I would really like to be a fossil. I'd like to be completely irrelevant in terms of my work, so that we can actually see that this has made a difference for young girls and the way that they live their lives and the way they access opportunities and take up their space and own their power and have choice and voice and authority and dignity and all of those things that everybody should have.
So there's two questions. Having been a humanitarian worker, I mean, you've seen women in all sorts of extraordinary situations. Is there one common theme that could improve the life of a woman everywhere, just by turning that tap on? Is it education?
Well, you know, what I do is I use the barometer of women's safety. So when I work with women, I ask two questions. The first question is, do you feel safe? And more often than not, the answer is no. And when they say no, I say, all right, then what will it take to make you feel safe? And that's the idea there. They've just told me, well, you know, we really need to have access to the market or the bathroom, or we need to get out of this camp, or we need this and it's about those listening, first of all, rather than making any assumptions about what people need, but also building from that base. Because if you are not safe in your body, in your home, on the street, in school, in the workplace, in political office, anywhere, all the other rights are irrelevant. And that first, before anything else, your own safety. And we can't, it's shocking that we can't take that for granted, but we have to start there, and we have to be able to achieve that. And then it opens up doors to everything else. And then I want to see promotion of girls in education. I want to see an overhaul of global education curricula. I want to see us teaching rights and nonviolence and consent to babies. I want us to get all of that stuff right. I want a global access to healthcare, sexual and reproductive health and rights. I want women in political office and women in all office. I want all of those things. But I really want women's safety and bodily autonomy and integrity first, because if you don't have that, you really can't access any of the other stuff. If you don't feel safe, you're not going to go to school.
That's so true. Yeah. I talk about that all the time. So it's quite a bit of a shock to me, because I thought you'd say education, but you said safety. We have so many systems that are dated, that have been set up to manage, you know, just as an example, passports or whatever it might be. But many of those are so flawed around safety issues for women through the trauma they've been through. What would you say generalized to people who've been administering very large scale systems and think that's the way to do things? Would you say, have a look, you know, look underneath what's happening for women?
Just ask. We do not even think to ask women what they need before we make all of these assumptions. It baffles me. I can give you a great example living here in New York. In the onset of the pandemic, now we're coming on 1 year of this, I cannot believe, we all subscribed to text messaging service about COVID and what to do. And the messages were very much the same. 6 times a day, we got a message that said, shelter in place, stay home, stay safe, and so on. And I thought, there's an assumption here that isn't true for some women, for many women, in fact. And so I said, all right, let's see where this goes. And so 2 weeks into it, 4 weeks into it, well, about 6 weeks into it, someone must have gotten hold of the text messaging service, because the tone changed. And it said, actually, not everybody is safe at home. And if you're not here, call this number or do X and Y, whatever. And I thought, well, that's a kind of knee-jerk reaction. You know, we could have predicted that from the beginning. If somebody had actually asked women, you know, is this the right kind of messaging? And what is that going to mean to you if we issue that? And how's that going to put you at greater risk? And are we making an assumption that home is safe for everybody? It's a blanket assumption that actually isn't true. I mean, we're talking about intimate partner violence. That is the most common form of violence everywhere, every country, every culture, every religion, every socioeconomic class, everyone. So to make the assumption that home is safe is naive at best and dangerous, damaging at worst. So we just didn't listen to women. We didn't even ask them. And then when we did, it just was such a belated reaction. I don't want to say it's too late, because it's never too late to catch up, but still, it could have been thought out better from the very beginning, from that first text message.
So that's fascinating, because we have so many angry women, you know, crying out on all sorts of issues across social media. And really what you're saying is they're not being listened to. And if somebody bothered to ask them, things could probably change very quickly.
Right. I mean, and it's quite a radical thing, even in the field working in humanitarian assistance, to ask, what do you need? What do you need? And I can't assume that I can deliver that need, but at very least, let me start by hearing it, and then make the right connections, or do the right advocacy, or pitch for the right project, or beg for the right pot of money. Let me at least ask. I think we know there are some things that are necessary and that are important. Access to water and sanitation and hygiene facilities, lighting in camps, safe access, women's spaces for unaccompanied women and girls, all of those kinds of things we see over and over again. But if we're talking about prioritizing that stuff, or if we're talking about other things that we might not have seen, well, just ask. I think the challenge is us being nimble enough and able to deliver on what women say that they need. You know, how accountable are we? Or do we come in with prepared packages and services built on our own assumptions, or built on patterns that we've seen in other places?
So I understand in the States, domestic and family violence shelters, apparently from something I read, have been used as COVID shelters. They've been sort of hijacked. Is that correct?
Well, I saw that everywhere. Well, I heard about it everywhere. Yes. And that's because there was a shortage of safe spaces. And so a lot of the resources dedicated to women, yes, were repurposed. I think COVID is something that nobody was prepared for. And, we've reacted in a kind of knee-jerk way, unfortunately, and looking at, how we just scrambled for resources and information and spaces and masks, and I mean, in America, toilet paper, all sorts of things, was frantic. And I think we just lacked the preparedness that we try and cultivate in other settings that are prone to emergencies. But part of what's interesting is some of the countries that responded the worst are countries who exist in relative arrogance and think, well, this never would happen here. And yes. I think that's the most dangerous sentiment, is to think that we are all safe or protected, or worse, better than everybody else. And I think we do that with violence against women all the time. We other it and say, well, that's other women over there. That's not here. That's not my country or state or community. No, that's all of us. So I think understanding the universality of these types of things, and that's why COVID has been such a difficult awakening for so many people, because it has universalized an experience that we never imagined we would share.
Yeah. So there's a new administration in the States, and then I want to get on to the Arab region of the world. There's a new administration. There's a lot to repair globally around women because of foreign policy. Do you think it's achievable?
I think we have to start, don't we? First of all, I think that repairing the damage done is going to take some time. We cannot keep playing with women's bodies and lives like a light switch, to turn them on with a certain administration or political persuasion, and off and on and off. I mean, and it doesn't work that way. It's not just add rights and stir and we spring back to life. It really takes a lot of time to rebuild that trust, to rebuild the systems and services, to look at what price women have paid over the last 4 years or whatever administrations in their loss of rights or in the compromise of their rights. So I think we need to decide, first of all, once and for all, that we're not going to keep playing with women's bodies the way that we have been in the US, certainly, but also understand that these things take a very, very long time. And, is it achievable? I believe it's achievable. Is it achievable in my lifetime? I think some things might be. I keep telling my team, please dig me from the grave and give me updates, because this is a long haul kind of effort, and we are short attention span creatures, and we cannot keep throwing energy and money at things thinking that we're going to fix it instantly, when actually it's going to take, we're talking about processes of social change. If you want it to be meaningful, you've got to be a little bit patient. It's hard.
So how are things have improved in the Arab region that, because women, they had a really tough time?
Well, I think women in the Arab region share a lot of tough things that women all over the world share. Lack of legislation that supports them, or active discrimination in legislation, or where there is legislation that would work in their favor, it's ignored or incomplete or unapplied. Lack of representation in political space and leadership and decision making, discriminatory messages in education, stereotypes, certainly violence against women, and the Arab region also has several protracted crises. So we're talking about making it even more difficult. If the situation is difficult as it is, when you have a conflict, and conflicts that last as long as these tend to, Syria, Yemen, Palestine, Iraq, and so on, these are massive setbacks. First of all, the movement of population, it's hard to build anything stable when everybody is on the move and they have no safe space and they have no viable country. But also the violence seems to take precedence, the conflict takes precedence, and then the kind of national agenda very often trumps the feminist agenda. So even in fighting for women's rights in those kinds of spaces, people say, well, it's not the time for you right now, ladies. We've got bigger issues to solve. And so you're constantly put on the back burner. And I think that makes it very, very difficult as well. And a culture and context of patriarchy. But that's global. So, I mean, these are things that, we see those kinds of commonalities and see how hard they are. And this is a region where the population, as I said, is very young, and people are fighting all the time for space, for legitimacy, for rights, for freedom, for safety. But it is extremely difficult because the Middle East is one of those places where the US and other powers have their tentacles and very often make a mess of things. And so that's also difficult when people are interfering in your business and setting their own agendas. How do you build or how do you cultivate an indigenous feminist movement when people are manipulating your space as much as they are?
Yeah. So as an academic and working with the Arab Institute, are there certain things that you're proud of, that you feel you're chipping away and you're making a real difference?
I think it's about the micro things that you do every day. It's about the listening to young women. It's about creating an opportunity, opening a door. Every time I speak anywhere, every time we have a conference or event, I bring young women in. I pass the mic all the time. I'm not interested in preserving my position of leadership and decomposing in my seat. I want to make sure that young women have voice, and I always put them actually on stages back when we had physical events with leaders and politicians and global change makers, because I want them to feel like their voice matters. And so for me, those are the kinds of things that really make a difference for them. And when you have an opportunity like that at a young age, you never forget it.
Yeah, absolutely.
The light is disappearing from my face as we speak.
So that's really a great segue for those business leaders that are watching this. What one thing can they do in their management style, in their leadership style, to improve things? Because businesses, for me, are a really big part of the solution, because economic empowerment for women is about, being able to move forward with life. But it's not just about economic empowerment, it's about safety as well.
Absolutely. I think it's really about understanding the nuance, the implications of the work that you do, who's doing the work, and under what conditions they're doing it. I mean, those are kind of obvious things, right? Are you paying everybody the right way? You're not exploiting anyone. You're making sure that you're ethical in your practices, in your hiring and your promotion, in opportunities. Make sure that the company is representative and looks like the population. I don't want diversity for the sake of it or tokenism, but what I really want to see is, we can no longer deny that everybody looks different, and there are capacities and opportunities everywhere. And I think people really need to be given the space to take on those positions. And some people need to step aside in order to let that happen. And that's really about understanding that we do need to make an effort to level the playing field. It's not about pushing people aside as much as the fact that there are certain people, women included, who've been denied opportunities since the beginning of time. And so now we need to fix that. We need to remedy that wrong. We need to correct that. So it really means creating an environment that is respectful, that is open, that values diversity and inclusion and equality, and lets women speak, makes sure that they speak, lets them lead, looks at the impact of whatever business they're in, whatever product or service they've got. What is it doing? What are the externalities? What are the things we're not seeing? I think it means being a little bit sensitive and asking a lot of people who are implicated in whatever the business is. I'm speaking in abstraction because it could be anything, to understand what impact that has on people's lives. Because sometimes you really don't know, you end up making things inadvertently worse and you have no idea how that's happened.
So there's probably a few questions you ask yourself. What can I do to contribute to positive change? Or has my time come and is it time for me to step aside and allow the next generation?
Share the space. It's very easy.
Yeah.
And I think it's really dangerous if people want to continue to maintain their positions of power. I do not. I would, like I keep saying, I would love to retire. And every time I hear a dynamic young woman speak, I think, oh, thank God, I'm putting in my notice. I'm done. Because that's what I want. I there's no satisfaction in me. I've said before many times, there's really no satisfaction in me doing a job that is built on what should have been common sense. There's something fundamentally wrong with the world, as I said in my TED talk, when ending sexual violence is a career. I mean, we shouldn't even have this kind of a job. It's a terrible job. I want it to be something that is just, that exists, that is common, that is done, and that is non-negotiable, and that people can't imagine that there ever was a time when we had to actively create professional categories of people to fight this. That's what I want to see.
Touche. So I guess, over such a long and varied career, burnout would be a real issue for you because it's go, 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 go. How have you managed that throughout your career? And now, what do you do for your own self-care?
Well, when you're working on the humanitarian front lines, that's absolutely a problem. And you really have to pace yourself and understand what you're up against. You get quite used to being in those high intensity situations, which I think is, takes a toll on you in the long term. And I remember somebody told me in 2002, actually, before I moved to Afghanistan, they said, if you get to the point where you need a break, you've already gone too far. So build in micro breaks for yourself. Now that sounds lovely, and it was very sweet piece of advice. I wasn't really able to apply it because I was I was just chasing emergencies. And I think when I got to the point that I was very deeply immersed in this and couldn't see my way out, that's when I said, all right, maybe I should step back. I loved it. I loved the work that I did, and I didn't necessarily burn out, but I wanted to do something that was more meaningful and sustainable over the long term. So not just this kind of quick fix response. And that's why I moved into academia. And I got a dog, and it's amazing. Yes, it's amazing how that has, how he has helped me achieve balance.
Yeah.
And there's something about having animals in your life, and I'd never had that before. And it was something I felt was missing when I was in the fields. You can't cart a pet around to a war zone. But the minute I had the opportunity, that has changed my life in many ways, because you find joy in very simple things. You have to take time to play. You need to take time to walk. It gets you outside. You can't have 10 meetings in a row. So that joy and kind of mindfulness, that's for me like a meditation almost.
And does she have a name?
He does. His name is Zazu, and he's somewhere pottering around. I'm sure he wants a walk.
So you've obviously worked from home during COVID. Has that been difficult?
Well, I appreciate the flexibility in terms of time, and I always worked at home in addition to working in an office. So I just would take my work home with me, or work crazy hours because of international phone calls and time zones and whatnot. But I miss the camaraderie. I miss people. I miss faces. I miss random encounters in elevators or on the street, or I miss seeing people smile. We don't see that anymore because you can't tell if they're smiling. I think there's a lot of feelings of disconnect that this has brought, and the long-term mental health implications. I mean, aside from the physical health stuff, but the mental health implications, we have absolutely no idea. And we're going to be dealing with that for a long time coming. And that's what I'm worried about, because we've been living in isolation almost, with very minimal human interactions, unless you have a family with you. But even then, you know, we're not meant to be caged. And this is a big ask for a lot of people. I mean, to go 1 year without hugging anyone, I think is
Well, I mean, that's so true. That human, I've talked to a lot of people in the mental health space about that. People are hanging out, particularly in aged care, for a hug from somebody that's connected to them. And we forget all about those things. I mean, I know I haven't seen my parents in quite some time, and I certainly feel it, and I know they're feeling it. Is there one thing that you miss, you know, from COVID's imposed on your own life?
Oh, it is the random connections with strangers, where you feel like you're part of a community.
Yeah.
You know, it is, and living in a city like New York, you know, you don't have time alone. You don't have an empty street, and you don't live here if that's what you want. You want to live as part of this system that seemingly never sleeps, or never slept. At least now it seems to be quite sleepy. But the idea of the way we interact with each other, and the way we coexist, and the way we share space, and sometimes it's quite intense and it's very, very shared, but that is the beauty of this city. We weren't meant to live 6 feet apart. We were meant to actually be quite squished on our island. And I miss that. I miss the idea that, you know, we used to not be afraid of each other, and I don't like that we are now. I think that's going to take a long time to undo.
Yeah, I can't get too close. You know, I've got to, you know, keep my distance. All of those things will take time. So I ask everybody in all of that conversation, what does spirituality mean to you? Where are you at with meaning and purpose in your life?
Well, for me, it is, it's in solitude and silence. It is, it's in the sea very much. I love the water. And anytime I am underwater, I find that is very calming for me. It's really about getting in touch with who you are and what you really want, and who you are trying to be in the world. So those moments of quiet, time spent with my dog, very, very simple things, where I feel like where I'm listening to myself. And that can be lots of places and lots of thoughts, but that clarity of purpose. And I have to ask myself, especially in a field like this, why am I doing this? Do I still believe in this? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the best that I can? You know, those are the kinds of things that helps me keep myself in check and gives me perspective. And I think gives me a sense that even if we're disconnected right now, we are part of a much bigger thing. And doing this kind of work is going to have an impact. I have to believe it will have an impact. Otherwise, you know, how do we go from one day to the next? But it's in those moments where I remind myself, even when I'm at my most frustrated, to say that this will have meaning, and I might not see it now, but I have to believe it. And that's probably the most faith that I can conjure up, belief that we are working to build something better, even if I won't be there on this grand day of victory, this reckoning. It will happen. And for me, that's a practice. That's a discipline.
Thank you for joining us, Lina. It was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much. I realize this lighting is hilarious, and I'm sure your viewers have wondered why.
I know. But anyway, I will get the audio as well. So that was great. And it was fantastic, the safety message, because it's so relevant around trauma-informed care, around listening to people, like so basic. It's like,
yeah.
I don't know why people don't get this.
I know. It is so simple. And when you actually take the time to ask women, I mean, they're quite shocked. You say, you know, what can I do? Because I know that I'm not entirely, you know, I can't wave a magic wand and make them safe. but they will tell you what is the one thing that I can start with. What would be, they would say, well, we just don't have lighting that's near the bathroom and it makes us not want to go pee, something simple.
Yeah.
And then I try and fight for those things. I mean, again, I never have enough power to be able to deliver them as I'd like to, because I'm often part of a larger system and there's a whole, a process. But at least I've heard them, and at least I am taking that message to where it needs to be.
So just for my knowledge, in the, because we finished the interview, in the humanitarian work, what would your work look like as an emergency? What would you be doing? I mean, it's not just distributing food. What sort of thing?
I don't, well, I'm deployed, or I was, I mean, I'm not there anymore, deployed as part of a rapid response team that would be in the country within 72 hours of the emergency. So once it's decided that this is like a high level, serious, messy emergency, I would have to be ready to go. And I would try and set up or reestablish the systems and the services that help prevent and respond to sexual violence. So where are the health facilities? Where are the shelters and safe spaces? Where are the counselors and psychosocial support? What are the security personnel doing? Are they perpetrating or are they helping? What about the justice sector? What are women and girls experiencing? Where? What can be done? Do they have a safe space to sleep? Do they have access to water and sanitation and hygiene facilities? Are they well lit? Are they lockable? Are they able to access distribution points for food? I mean, I'm not distributing the food, but I'm making sure that all of those considerations are taken into account. It's just putting on the lenses that help you see women's experience and then make sure that you're mitigating risk. If you tell people come to a distribution point for food and you're handing out 50-pound sacks of flour, well, it's going to be very difficult for a lot of women and young girls to be able to access that. First of all, because they're going to be trampled by men.
Yeah.
And they can't carry the stuff. And, there's all sorts of things that go into it. And then there's also the risk of sexual exploitation and abuse by people who are there trying to help.
Yeah.
So the idea that it happens more often than we think, more often than not, where people are in positions of power and say, oh, you want an extra ration card, or you've got 6 kids to feed? Well, why don't you show me how badly you need it?
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times that happens, and how to prevent that, and how to be mindful. So I juggle a lot of things. That's my emergency life. That was my emergency life.
That would take so much out of you. I mean, I get it. I really get it. Did you have a supervisor? How did you debrief?
Well, I mean, I worked for the United Nations, so I had, tons of supervisors. But how did I debrief? I mean, there's the work debrief, and then there is the, my emotional state, which I didn't do. I mean, there was no opportunity for any of that. You live with your colleagues, or you live in a camp setting. I mean, in Haiti, after the earthquake, I lived in a tent for 6 months. So you're really, you don't have the luxury, unfortunately, of downtime or taking care of yourself, or reflecting on what you don't have a lot of alone time or quiet time or anything, especially in the first few weeks or months of the emergency.
Yeah, well, I've been to a number of major disasters, and the reason I asked that question is our training is we have to have an independent, and they are called professional supervisors. By our code of conduct, we have to debrief when we've been through trauma. So we spend some time and we go and work on that. We also have our own psychologist as required, but the debrief is really important. And because you've got to get it off, and I know I've been to Bali and places like that, and it's go, and when you stop, is when you're going to fall apart. And I know I've
never been offered that, and that's shocking that we don't have the kind of system. Like, think of it like the military. I'm going to turn on the light while we talk, because I can't.
Yeah.
But you think of it like the military, where they have a set of support. Oh,
that's better.
I'm so sorry. Like, here, I kind of laughing, thinking, oh my God, my head looks like a big moon, and it's all gone dark all around. I know, damn it, I should have turned on the light, but I never really liked. I do a lot of audio stuff, but I don't do a lot of video. Anyway,
Right,
so
okay.
I hope that won't make a mess of your recording.
No, we'll do some editing around that, so that's fine. So, and I'll probably take some of the darker stuff as an audio grab, so we'll do something around all of that. So the other thing that we've got really good at is we have rituals. So for example, when I come home or wherever I am to sleep, the first thing I do before I talk to anyone is go and take my clothes off and have a shower and let the water, and I'm conscious of it, let the water just pour over me so I can get rid of how I'm feeling, and then I step out. So I won't talk to anyone until I've done that. So it's a bit like leaving your boots at the door or your boots at the front of the tent, just that moment where you say, I've got to check out. It's easier said than done when you've seen really terrible things.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we didn't really, when you're in the field,
it's
hard to come around that time, but you know, you try, and some people try and do yoga and stretching and, you know, things like people try different things, but it takes a lot of discipline to be able to do it. And it also takes the assumption that, you know, you are living alone, which most of the time you're not, and that you have running water, which sometimes you do not, you know, all of those kinds of things make it difficult. So you have to, every single time in every context, you have to improvise, and you rely on each other. You know, it's the camaraderie of the humanitarian community. And
so
when I missed it a lot.
Did you? So where's you for your career now? Where, I mean, you're going to stay with the Arab Institute or?
Oh, that's a good question. Are we still recording? I mean,
no, we're not recording.
I'm looking to build something independent because quite soon I'll have to move on to my next thing. And I love the Institute, but it's been like my kind of child on life support. And what I really want to do down the line, whether it's, you know, this year or I don't know, in a few years' time, is build an independent advisory service. So I have kind of three things. I'm going to build, I don't want to work for anybody anymore. I'd like to build.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yep. Yeah.
Right. I want to build, first of all, an advisory service that's based on working with individual clients who are committed to women's rights and have the means to do something about it, but maybe just don't know how. I mean, after 2.5 decades in the field, you know, I can advise on the how. So I'd like to work with philanthropists or with maybe, you know, small celebrities or with foundations or the private sector, whatever. Any client who's really interested and committed and has the will and has the means. So that would be the advisory component. And then I want to do more. I do a lot of public speaking, but I need to monetize it. Because I feel like in this field, it's that people ask you all the time to do big speech, high level stuff, and nobody, you know, and if I was a lawyer or something, and people would offer you an honorarium or offer whatever, and nobody ever. So I really would like to, you know, have us all rethink, like those of us who do this kind of work that people assume is charity. You know, I think that's a very dangerous kind of thing, and it lends us to kind of emotional blackmail. You know, I get a lot of, oh, come on, Lina, you know, it's okay. You know, it's only Saturday. You still have Sunday. You know, a lot of that kind of stuff. So monetizing my speaking, and then I'm working on a book. I'm working on a memoir. So I want time to write. So those three things.
So yeah. Well, okay, so my background was originally PR. I ran my own PR agencies and was part of Edelman globally. I was their Australian manager.
Master at PR. I have tons of content, but no contacts.
So what I'm saying is keep in touch, because the advisory, I can certainly see a place for you. Yes, with celebrities that have the means. Some of the big corporations, like. Privately, I think International Women's Day has lost its plot. I mean, it's like giving out giveaways, and it's just, it's so awful. I'm not even going, I'm not going to anything this year for that very reason. You know, so I think you can add voice. And the other thing around monetizing, being asked to speak, which I totally identify with you, I have a saying that you're welcome to steal. And when people say things to me, I say, well, yeah, but I have a biological problem. I need to eat. And then I shut up. And then I say, on my website, you'll find my speaking fees and how to book me. And I don't even enter into the negotiation, because if they can't afford it, I'm sorry, I can't work for nothing.
Exactly.
And I think,
I'm
yeah,
just getting myself listed on speakers bureaus and stuff like that, because I'm starting to do it now. I mean,
good.
what I'm doing as I'm with the Institute, I'm building all these components of this, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Well, if I could, yeah, if I can help in any way, in a little way, or we can have another conversation later, I think that would be great. With better light.
I know, I'm so sorry. I would love to let us please have another conversation about it. I'd be delighted. If you think there are any opportunities that I should tap into, this is, for me, it's interesting because when you work in the field, you work in virtual anonymity, and I wasn't active on social media. Because I didn't even have internet connections when I, out wherever I was. I wasn't focused on any kind of, self-promotion makes me very uncomfortable. I wrote a book on Afghanistan and I didn't even promote it. Like, I don't know how to be comfortable in that space, and PR is something I need to learn.
Okay.
And especially if I'm going to be generating business for myself, oh boy.
But the reality is, I mean, is to be authentic, to be who you are. And when you spoke to me around what you want to see, and you don't want to be doing this, you want to do yourself out of a job, and common sense, they're your big things. That's what people will hook into. They're the aha moments that people will say, I'll pay for that, because she's saying things that other people aren't saying. And it's just what it's all your years of experience. Anyway, I'm not here to give you a lecture.
Oh, this is great. I mean, how do we do it, and what can we, what might we do, and how can I trouble you? Just on the tail end of a conversation about exploiting other people. Like, I don't want to take advantage of your kindness and this great offer, but I would love to.
Well, I mean, I'll have a think about it. I mean, I'm really focused this year on, and I tend to operate globally because it's just, I've always done that career-wise, and I start with a ripple effect. And very often, being Australian bound, I'll start with an overseas emphasis and bring it back. And I often use people with an international profile to come into our little pond to disrupt often. So there might be an opportunity there because it works. And speaking tour or a book tour or a virtual tour or things like that. But I'm really determined to end sexual harassment and workplace bullying in the workplace this year, because it is at epidemic proportion. And what I hear over and over and over again, particularly, it happens to all genders, but it's very focused on women. Their whole lives are destroyed, their careers, their families, the mental health ramifications, because what people do is they break one's sense of self. And it's very aligned to the Nazi concentration camps or to, war injury. And I do a lot around moral injury, which you might not know about. Moral injury is a leadership issue. And it was first identified by Jonathan Shea, who was a psychiatrist that worked with Vietnam veterans. And he noticed that they all had post-traumatic stress, but they weren't getting better. There was nothing he could do. And he started looking at that. And he went back to some academic research and started putting it together, and he identified that it's leaders not being there when you're needed. And since then, you have psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, theologians doing multidisciplinary research, and it's growing. And during COVID, it's been quite widely spoken about in the healthcare system, particularly in the US, because people are making life and death decisions about who they save. But that's a leadership issue because they don't have the resources. And the problem with that, similar to bullying, is it fractures who you are. Your values are compromised. So corruption, all of those things. I should imagine it's probably endemic in humanitarian fields because you can't stop the pain. And there is acute suffering because leaders will not give you fundamental resources. So that's my focus for this year. And I've started to put it on the agenda. I get very angry. LinkedIn's my main amplifying network. And you'll trumpet on about everything, and I get angry. But it's always done with an intention to bring people into the conversation and to build that activism in that way. And it works.
Yeah, I love it. I love the use of anger for that. Absolutely. I think it's fantastic. And
All
your
right.
link clearly is working for you, because that's how you found me.
Yes, that's right. So there you go.
I mean, that's amazing. I was going to say, how did that even happen?
I don't know. I mean, I just, networks, but I, I try and have diverse people, and I try personally really hard to have friendships with people that are not like me, and I think that's a lesson we've all got to take, that we shouldn't be socializing with people that are just duplications of ourselves. The more diverse our networks are, the more we're exposed to different thought processes.
The more rich our lives are, and isn't that the point?
Yeah. All right, my darling. Well, have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too. You too. Oh,
And we'll talk soon.
I love it so much.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.